Hello, and thanks for tuning back into the channel. There were a few purposes of today's ride, the first of which being merely wanting to show people out there sort of the state of mobility and cycling infrastructure in a San Diego suburb. I also needed to stop by the local record store, as this was a few days before Christmas and I still needed to get a gift for my girlfriend's sister. Another purpose of this ride was to sort of reconnect with the area that I grew up in. And I find that riding bikes really offers a fresh perspective on the place that you live. And as I'll be moving away from here this coming summer in 2026, I've been trying to make more of an effort to engage with the place that I live and find some gratitude. So here I'm coming out of this neighborhood into our first bit of protected infrastructure, which is going to be a big part of this video, as I've said. San Diego County, particularly in the suburbs, does not have a lot of cycle-specific infrastructure. There's been a lot of pushback, as in many places in the United States, to infrastructure like this. And in fact, my city is one of the very few places in San Diego County, outside of San Diego proper itself, that has any bicycle-specific infrastructure to speak of at all, particularly in the case of urban riding, or in this case, suburban. Bike trails and rail trails and other recreational forms of infrastructure do exist, and we'll see some of that today. But in terms of urban infrastructure, there's really not much to speak of at all. Turning onto a street here that I would really rather not ride in the road. As you can see, there's no bike lane, and in fact there isn't even a sharrow, as they're often called, where sort of there's a expectation that motor vehicles share the road with bicycles. But this road is really just too much of a high-speed corridor for me to feel comfortable or safe riding in. It used to be a 45 mile an hour speed limit zone. They've recently reduced it to 40 miles an hour, but still the amount of cars that are driving well above that speed, it's just a little bit too close for comfort to want to ride. So we're going to cross these 4 lanes and make our way to sort of our first stop, which is a regional park. The regional park is connected to sort of a historical park, which features an adobe ranch home that was part of the original Mexican land grant when this area of California was part of Mexico. This is a nice park, not only for historical value, but also it's a nice community meeting space. Lots of people walking their dogs. This is a nice community garden, which I think is around $50 a month to secure yourself a plot. There's the old adobe house and the chapel attached. And it's really quite a beautiful piece of history here in Southern California, and these adobes are dotted all around the area. We've made our way into the regional park, which is named after an indigenous word meaning place of the frogs or land of the frogs. And being in a semi-arid climate, water is somewhat hard to come by in Southern California, so this is a really nice place where there are ponds and creeks. And the indigenous history here is really quite apparent, as you can see through these metates or milling stones. I tried to hide the exact location of them because, of course, they're vulnerable pieces of history. You're liable to run into horses in this park, as there are many stables nearby. In fact, some of the stoplights and crosswalks intersections in the area have crossing buttons about 5 feet up in the air for people on horseback, which is kind of interesting. For about 20 years of my life, I've lived within a mile or two of this park, and it really represents something special to me. I spend a lot of time here, whether that's on my bike or running. I like to take runs here. Something about this place returns me to a childlike joy and curiosity and appreciation for what's around me. It's really a bit of a refuge, definitely a sense of tranquility. Although by this point I'd only ridden for a few miles, I was feeling ready for a snack and a place to sit down and relax and enjoy the sunshine and the cooler weather as we're moving into winter here. We're making our way towards what is essentially a converted rail trail that runs along the San Luis Rey River, which runs from the mountains in eastern San Diego County all the way to the sea. The trail was built on disused railway tracks that was used by the United States military. Being in Southern California near San Diego, there's a major marine and naval presence. We've had some rain intermittently throughout the last couple weeks, so it was quite muddy over here. That was a bit of a trend on this particular ride, especially on the dirt trails. It was quite muddy. We're making our way now to the eastern terminus of the San Luis Rey River Trail, and it's quite a nice place. I would say for the most part it's predominantly recreational, although many people do live along this trail. It doesn't really serve you in terms of everyday errands or urban cycling necessarily, so you see a lot of recreational cyclists using this path, but that's by no means a bad thing, and I'm certainly grateful that we have this trail. It's about 9 miles from this point to the ocean, so about 18 miles there and back, but we won't be riding the whole trail today. This is probably my favorite point on the trail. I see a lot of the sycamore trees and red willows and oak trees that are changing colors and shedding their leaves as the season changes. We've had a lot of fluctuations in weather over the past 6 weeks or so. October and November are never very cold in Southern California, but we had a period in October that was quite pleasant weather, nice and cool, and some rain in November before it got quite warm again in the middle of December. I've noticed living in Southern California, you're used to the Santa Ana winds, which is winds blowing from the east over the desert. So the wind is very dry and warm. And I've noticed that since I was a kid, it seems that the Santa Anas come later than they used to. It used to be more of a October phenomenon, and now we're experiencing it more in December, even into January. And I believe that was largely the culprit of the fires in Los Angeles early in 2025. The San Luis Rey River Trail is mostly a a class 1 bike trail, meaning there are no at-grade crossings and it's completely separate from car traffic or roads that motor vehicles occupy, except for this section of it where it cuts through a neighborhood. But after that, it's smooth riding from here. I enjoy this trail recreationally, but it does become a bit monotonous after a while. So it's not a trail that I tend to ride very often, especially because the trailhead is not necessarily close to where I live. Here's an example of a below-grade crossing that goes under the road up above. As I said, the trail is a bit monotonous. You gotta find ways to enjoy yourself. Now I've cut back through the park once again that I had ridden through on my way down, but I didn't feel it was necessary to film it again. I've just come out of a sports park complex that's relatively new in my city, and you can see all this new development. On the left there is some nice new mixed-use development that's very close to a transit station, juxtaposed next to this suburban sprawl of townhomes that are really quite an eyesore, unfortunately. But I do like this sort of multimodal trail that runs next to a very, very busy road. Offers a little bit more comfort for people on bikes or people walking. We're about to start on a segment of another rail trail called the Inland Rail Trail, which will eventually run about 20 to 30 miles, again from east to west. Unfortunately, this segment that I'm on now is pitifully short, but it's quite nice to see some transit-oriented development happening. Right across from me here is a station for our local commuter rail. This is a detached segment of the Inland Rail Trail. After this portion ends, it picks up again probably 3 or 4 miles away, but at that point it becomes more of a class 1 bike trail that's more or less separated from at-grade crossings. But it is the only section of the trail we're going to ride today. Maybe we can explore the rest of it another time. But it is quite hilly. And the at-grade intersections that it does contain feel a little bit unwieldy sometimes and don't necessarily make for a seamless ride. We're looping back around now, heading into the downtown area of the city in which I live, and we'll eventually stop at the record store and take a look around the downtown area. A lot of these roundabouts are new, and I know for a lot of people this kind of infrastructure is almost ancient, but I'm really happy to see that my city is starting to understand the benefits of this type of infrastructure. One step at a time. So this type of protected infrastructure was rolled out slowly throughout 2025. The connectivity is still not fantastic, but I'm very happy to have it nonetheless. There was quite a bit of pushback from concerned citizens in my city. Unfortunately, some of the loudest criticism came from what is called vehicular cyclists, meaning people who believe that a bicycle should operate under the same rules and regulations as a motor vehicle. which is problematic for many reasons. But it was sad to see that cyclists themselves were coming out in opposition against this kind of protected infrastructure. Ultimately, it's not necessarily for recreational cyclists, and the goal would hopefully be to introduce to people a new way of getting around their city. See, I don't love this segment where you're forced to straddle this line between cars going straight and cars turning right.
It's so sketchy, dude.
Which then again shoots you right out into sort of a hairy situation, forcing you to ride in a vehicular sort of manner, which I don't really appreciate, but fortunately feel confident enough to do. The population in northern San Diego County has definitely experienced quite a boom, especially since I was a child. And this area doesn't quite feel as suburban as it used to. And I think that should be the impetus to re-examine the type of infrastructure that we have and attempt to accommodate people who are using other modes of transportation besides a car, especially when downtown areas such as this one are really seeing a big increase in urban density. Okay, we're rolling into the downtown area, and I'm gonna look for a place to park my bike, but there's really only 3 or 4 places to lock up your bike here, and I think that's kind of indicative of the situation in a lot of suburban cities where maybe you have a greenway or a class 1 bike trail, but consideration as to where you're going to park your bike is a little bit lackluster. Finally, I found this one outside the brewery that's shaped like a nice mug of beer. We do have a nice presence of entertainment down here, though. This Avo Playhouse is owned by the city, and I've actually worked a few gigs there. Here's another place to park your bike outside of a somewhat infamous chain of restaurants. And finally, there's Standard's Record Shop and one of my favorite cafes in the area called Milk Organics. Nice to see a raised crosswalk there, and came across some live music as I was riding by. So I've secured the records that I was looking for. I picked up some Bob Dylan and the Byrds for my girlfriend's sister. Bit of an education in 60s music, which is sort of my forte in terms of musical knowledge and recommendation. Another hairy section here where we have the Sharrow, so cars should be expecting bikes to be riding, but again, I would prefer to ride on the sidewalk in this case. This road was also changed from a 40 mile an hour zone to a 35 mile an hour zone recently, but naturally cars regularly do well above that, and I don't feel safe riding there. Plus, I need to make my way over through this park anyway to reach the Conservancy Trail that we have.
Very muddy. Very muddy.
There is some new development that has gone up over the last few years on the eastern side of this trail, which is nice to see. And it seems to be done in a pretty tasteful way. There's also a new sort of pocket park, which was also given an indigenous name, which I think is really important to recognize and also in another undisclosed area in that park are more metates and milling stones, which I find very fascinating. I tend to look for them when I'm in sort of natural places, parks and what have you. In this area, it's just something that I find so fascinating. The tangible history of the people that came before you is such a compelling and wonderful way to engage with the place that you live. Even if it's a culture, and sometimes especially if it's a culture different from your own, I find it's a very interesting way to connect to the place where you live and to look at things a little more mindfully, with a little bit more intention and understanding. We're on the home stretch now. This road that I'm about to turn onto was also slated to have protected bike lanes, and I would wager that this corridor has some of the highest density and would serve the most people who could use the bike lanes in terms of commuting to work, accomplishing everyday errands. But for some reason, they have pushed back the construction of the bike lanes on this stretch of road. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the ride today and enjoyed a bit more of a mellow, sort of improvised ride through a San Diego suburb with me. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.